And welcome to our digital discussion tonight. My name is John Harry. So happy you could join us for our Antiques virtual show with Hindman Auctions. We have a great lineup of how they're going to look at some of our artifacts tonight. We're really excited to have the specialists from Hindman Auctions here tonight to tell us about some of the stuff that we have in our collection at the Milwaukee County Historical Society. Before I turn the system over to them, I just wanted to make a few announcements. First, if you haven't listened to it yet, our podcast series that was a partnership with the UW Milwaukee History Department, The Healthiest City, Milwaukee and Its Pandemics, is all out now. So if you go to MilwaukeeHistory.net, you can listen to that and get a sense of what the last pandemic and how they recovered from the 1918 flu pandemic in Milwaukee. You can get a sense of that. We also still have a limited amount of our beer collaboration left at Indeed Brewing Company on South 2nd Street in Walker's Point. So if you're still have not tried that, make sure that you get down there and do that as well. In the coming weeks, not even weeks, maybe in the next week, we're going to be announcing our schedule for bike tours for the summer, as well as kayak tours are coming up as well. So stay tuned for that. And if you're not on our mailing list, again, you can find that at MilwaukeeHistory.net. But tonight, we're going to find out some added information about some of the things that we have in our collection at the Milwaukee County Historical Society with the help of some experts. So I'm going to bring in to the program Wes Cowan, who is the vice chair of Hindman Auctions. Wes, welcome to the program.
Hey, thanks for inviting us, John. It's great to be here for digital discussions. For those of you who don't know much about Hindman Auctions, Hindman is the blended merger of two major auction companies in the Midwest, Cowan's Auctions and Leslie Hindman Auctioneers. We merged about 2.5 years ago. We have 10 offices nationally. We employ about 150 people in these offices, and together we sell about $60 to $70 million worth of antiques and art every year. We have with us tonight several of our specialists, Katie Guilbalt from San Diego, Corbin Horn from our Chicago office, and Joe Stanfield in our Chicago office. So we're delighted to be here. We were, truth be told, we were sent some pictures, and our mission was to investigate some of these items and then tell you a little bit about them. And in some cases, those of you who are watching might know more about these things than we do. But let's start with our first slide, John. I'm sure that some of you have probably seen this on exhibit, or I assume this is on exhibit. This is a piece of American stoneware by a Milwaukee resident named Susan Frackleton. Susan Frackleton was born Susan Goodrich in Milwaukee in 1848. She was educated in Milwaukee and later New York City. And in 1869, she married an Englishman named Richard Frackleton. It was an unhappy marriage. They lived in Milwaukee. Richard ran an import business that he didn't run very well, and he declared bankruptcy. And at that point, Susan decided that she had to divorce him because he couldn't support her and their children. And it was apparently a pretty stormy relationship marked by abuse, both verbal and physical. So it was a good thing for Frackleton to get out of the relationship. She had, in the 1870s, been drawn to crafts. It worked in many different kinds of craft, leatherwork, woodworking. But by 1876, she had really hit on her passion. That was ceramics. And she had been studying with the painter Richard Vianden, a Milwaukee artist, and was exposed to a lot of different artistic endeavors. Ceramics, though, were what drew her attention. In 1883, she formed her own company. that was, let's see, where my notes here. She formed the Frackleton China and Decorating Works, making ceramics, hand painting them, and this was part of an overall much larger movement that was started first in Scotland and then found its way to the United States. And today it's what we call the arts and crafts movement. It was sort of a rejection of the factory manufacturing of furniture and decorative arts, and it was the adherents to the arts and crafts movement felt that handmade, small batch kinds of things were much better. And Frackleton, with her ceramics industry, fit right in. Some of you may have heard of Rookwood pottery. Rookwood pottery was similar to Frackleton's movement, except it was in Cincinnati, but it was started by a woman named Maria Longworth, and it started out as Frackleton did, with sort of a hand painting china class for women. And these china painting classes really, many major cities in the United States in the late 19th century had clubs where women would get together and paint ceramics, hand paint ceramics. This particular piece is a punch bowl. It's one of several known, and you can see that it is it's a sort of a cream-colored ground to which applied grapes have been added and the grapevines, and then the paint is actually cobalt, and when it fires, it takes on this beautiful cream and cobalt or dark purple color. That's what Frackleton's company was known for, making this sort of handcrafted, beautifully decorated blue and often gray colored ceramics. The punch bowl is a pretty rare Frackleton form, all of which are basically signed on the bottom. I don't think there's a photograph of this, but many of them were signed with a design number and often with Frackleton or another decorator's name. This was probably made about 1902, and it's atypical of the other ones that I've seen in the sense that, can we look at the next slide, please? You'll see the interior is a sort of dark chocolate brown. Many of the other punch bowls that I have seen were actually decorated elaborately on the interior, often with with mottos that relate to love and wine, written in hand script. This one is sort of this brownish color that is not nearly as desirable as the ones that have the interior gray or cream color with the blue decorations. So what's this thing worth? Well, in 2005, similar example, similar size, looked identical to this one, except it had an interior decoration, sold for $15,000. The arts and crafts movement has had its heyday in among collectors, and it's sort of been declining over the past few years. Nonetheless, Frackleton's pottery is still very collectible. It has a national market, probably strongest in Milwaukee, but she's known nationally, and people collect her work on a national scale. I would think that because of the brown interior of this punch bowl, that it's worth less than the one that sold for $15,000. And the real question is, how much less is it worth? I would be very cautious were this to be taken out of the Milwaukee Historical Society and consigned to one of Hindman's auctions. I would probably put a pre-sale auction estimate of $6,000 to $8,000 on it. And with the expectation that it might do better because it is a rare form. But again, the interior is this sort of mundane brown glaze. Okay. Next. Oh, and here's a picture of Susan Frackleton holding and decorating a bowl that you can see with the applied grapes. It's not a punch bowl. It's a sort of a different kind of a large bowl. As with anything, any pottery, the scale of the piece is really important. And the piece that she's working on there would be considered a really large piece. I don't recognize the urn that is at the edge of the table as a Frackleton piece, but since it's in the photograph, it must be one of her works. I doubt that it still exists because it looks pretty darn fragile with those handles. Okay, next. All right. Who recognizes the running waiter advertising piece for Blatz? That's what this piece is called. It's well known among Breweriana collectors. It is, of course, from the Blatz brewery. You can see this is a figure of a beer bottle with a head and legs and arms and hand, and he's carrying a tray with a stein of foaming beer. The sign that you see in the back was apparently an added piece to that. Doesn't appear on all the running waiter pieces, but this is the kind of thing that would have been in a bar that would have sat behind the bar to remind people when they came in, you need to buy a Blatz beer. Who remembers the motto of the Blatz Brewing Company that was popular in the 50s? Milwaukee's finest beer. I asked John, who is also a beer collector, a Breweriana collector, if he remembered the Blatz jingle, and he said, "Well, sort of." And I sang it to him, but I'm not going to sing it to you because my voice is not very good. But if you just search this on YouTube, I'm sure you'll find it. Blatz, of course, was in business from 1851 to 1859 when it was purchased by the Pabst Brewery. And today it's still, I think, a brand that is offered by the Miller Brewing Company. Beer makers use these sorts of trade stimulators throughout the history of brewing, and they're very collectible. There's huge group of people that collect beer collectibles. This particular piece, if you can see on the neck of the beer, the silvery area, that was originally painted, and what you're seeing now, the silver underneath, is a white metal or a pot metal. Pot metal is a sort of a mixture of zinc and copper and aluminum, and it got its name pot metal or white metal around the turn of the century in the early auto factories when factory workers would, at the end of the day, clean up the scrap metal that was laying around on the factory floor and throw it into a big pot and melt it down. There's no real metallurgical name for or metallurgical consistency to the name pot metal, but it's just a soft, easily molded metal that through time doesn't hold up very well. It can become very soft and brittle. Pieces bend. They develop cracks. When it gets painted, the paint tends to, with age, begin to flake off. So what we're seeing here is a piece of pot metal where it's becoming unstable. It's affecting the paint overlying it, and the paint is starting to flake off. You may be able to see, if you look just underneath the head of foam on the beer stein, there is a horizontal crack in the beer mug. That again is typical of what happens with pot metal. So this piece was made near the end of the Blatz run. Various sources that I've been able to find suggest it was made around 1958. So remember again, Blatz was sold in 1959. So this is one of the last Blatz collectibles that you could get. Unfortunately, the condition of this holds back its value. If it were in perfect shape, in other words, the paint was all there wasn't a crack, the paper label wasn't torn, it might be worth about $100. Today, I would suggest that in a brewery auction, breweryana auction, it might fetch about $50. All right, moving right along, I'm going to introduce you now to Joe Stanfield. Joe is the head of fine arts at Hindman and specialist in American paintings. Joe, what do we got here?
Thanks, Wes. I appreciate it. When Sarah was telling me about this project, she sent a number of potential options to talk about. And when we saw that we have a Francesco Spakusa painting, it made the decision pretty easy for us. This is an artist that we see all the time at Hindman. It was born in Sicily in the late 19th century, but moved to Wisconsin as a small child. Is a very prolific artist. If I've seen one Spakusa, I've seen a lot. We've sold. I looked this up just before the talk. Hindman has sold over 100 paintings by Spakusa at auction, and just over 180 have ever come up for sale. So we have sold a large majority of these works. We hold the top 6 auction records for Spakusa, so I thought it would make the most sense to talk about this painting tonight, which I don't think this is the best image of this painting. I think it looks probably a little blurrier than it really is. Obviously, it's an impressionistic scene, but just for everyone to know, I don't think this is completely accurate, but still a lovely scene. Spakusa studied at the Art Student League in New York under John Carlson, and that's really where he went from painting sort of in interior scenes and still lifes to painting impressionistic landscapes like the one that we're seeing here. Carlson had a huge influence on Spakusa, and he really kept this particular style for the last about 40 years of his life. And this is pretty typical of what we see when we're in Wisconsin, looking at collections. If we go on an appointment in Milwaukee, I kind of almost expect to see a Spakusa on the wall. We've sold 100, but I've probably helped appraise double that over the years, and so it's certainly an artist that we're very, very familiar with. I'm sure a lot of people on the call are actually more familiar with this artist than I am. But for those who don't know, this subject matter is not exactly what you're looking for. Typically, we're looking more for a beach scene, usually with small children, sort of a playful scene. This is a little bit more serene. There's typically a little bit more action happening in the paintings by Spakusa that we have the most success with at auction. And when we're factoring in what is it worth at auction, for painting specifically, we have a variety of criteria. Who is it by? So in this particular instance, we know it's by Spakusa. What is it of? The subject matter is charming, but not exactly the A+ subject matter of the beach scene that most collectors are looking for. What is the medium? This is a pastel on board, and with a pastel, for many artists, I think it actually isn't quite as valuable as if it was an oil on board or an oil on canvas. For Spakusa, for whatever reason, the pastels and the oils do tend to sell for about the same amount. One of the other criteria is how big is it? This is actually a relatively large example for Spakusa at about 24 by 30 inches. So based on all of that criteria together, the subject, the size, the medium, I'm taking the extraordinary assumption that this painting is in great condition. I would bet that this painting would fetch somewhere between $2,000 and $4,000 and $3,000 and $5,000 at auction. And I think Wes mentioned this a little bit when he was chatting, but the market today is about as good of a market as we've seen at auction. So maybe 2 to 4 or 3 to 5,000 is actually conservative. We've seen a huge uptick in new buyers at auction over the last year during COVID. It's been it sounds somewhat counterintuitive that the world has been so difficult, but the auction market has been so robust. When you think about it, a nice 24 by 30 painting like this may fit just perfectly in the blank wall that you've been staring at while you've been working from home for the last year. So we've seen a lot of decorating with some of the paintings that we've been selling. We've seen a lot of new buyers coming into the market because auction has been really one of the only games in town, with a lot of galleries closed and a lot of art fairs across the world not taking place. So at 2 to 4, 3 to 5,000, maybe I'm being even too conservative, but it's certainly based a lot on the fact that we're not seeing a full-fledged beach scene with children, but still a very lovely and typical painting for the artist.
Hey, Joe, a couple questions come to mind based upon your discussions.
Yes, sir.
Let's just assume this was a beach scene.
Mm-hmm.
It had lots of kids splashing in the Lake Michigan surf,
Yep.
and they were wearing, their mother was there wearing a little red cap. And, the thing that we all sort of think about with a nice Spakusa painting,
Yep.
this strikes me as really, if this was a beach scene, this would be really big for him, right?
It would. We hold the auction record for Spakusa, and it was for a beach scene, which sold for $23,000 and was a similar size painting as this. So if you sprinkled in some sand in the foreground and some colorful clad children, this painting would probably be worth 3 or 4 times what it is with the subject matter that we're talking about today, based on the size and what I'm assuming is good condition.
So the Spakusa paintings, who's buying these paintings? Are they people that are Great Lakes collectors? Would we expect someone in California to buy a painting like this? Who's buying Spakusa?
That's a great question, and I can pretty definitively say that a majority of the Spakusa paintings that we have sold do sell regionally. They're selling to collectors in the Wisconsin, Illinois, Michigan, Indiana area, and I certainly don't mean that to sound that he doesn't have some national appeal, but I think that there are a lot. Maybe it's more emotional for collectors in this area of the world and in the Midwest. And we've sold a lot, and we've certainly seen repeat buyers for Spakusa as well.
So he's a great example of a regionalist that has a following in the area where he worked.
A regionalist, absolutely, and somebody that we typically sell to private collectors. I feel like this isn't something that there isn't a major gallery who represents his work. We're not typically selling to dealers. We're not typically selling to institutions. So these are usually going from Hindman straight to a private collector's wall.
Yeah, so I mean, to me, I've always thought of Spakusa as I really love his beach scenes. Most of which, the ones I've seen, are fairly small. But this is an example of a really good artist that, if one wanted to buy one of his paintings, you could buy one fairly reasonably and really enjoy it.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, $23,000 is obviously it's a decent amount of money, but for what it is as the auction record, yes, I would consider these somewhat affordable. And for a painting like this at $3,000 to $5,000, I think you're getting quite a bit of bang for your buck. You're getting an impressionistic painting by a revered artist in a regionalist area of the world. And if this came in, we would certainly be excited to handle it as we have been many times before.
Right. But just to make clear, even a small beach scene, one could buy for $1,000.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I mean, his most popular subject, one could buy it's affordable for almost everyone.
Yep.
Or for many people. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, many of us, yes, absolutely, and that's a great point. If you are interested in the artist, it is an attainable artist. The Monet water lilies that sold last night for 40 million was very exciting, and this has a similar look. So if you're into it, this is a little bit more accessible.
And one final question, if you don't mind, how does you say Spakusa was trained by John Carlson, who I tend to think of as his winter scenes, impressionistic nonetheless. But do you think? I mean, I look at this and I say, not this particular painting, but a Spakusa beach scene, and I think, wow, this is similar to what Potash was painting.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
And other people were painting these. Winslow Homer was painting beach scenes. Is this a long sort of tradition of that Spakusa was part of, this sort of summer light and beach scene paintings?
Yeah, and Potash is, I think, probably the best example of who he was emulating. I think Maurice Pendergast is probably the other artist I would think of who he obviously really enjoyed emulating. Carlson, I think maybe it's more of the handling of the paint than it is the subject or the time of year. Because you're right, Carlson's a little bit more drab, a little bit more snowy, East Coast scenes, whereas this is a little bit more cheerful. So I think he took some of the stylistic brushwork that he was using, but then used Potash definitely as more of a subject matter for his work.
Great, thanks, Joe. That's really really fascinating. I personally love Spakusa paintings, and I would not mind having one myself. Okay, let's move along. Thanks. Looks like big pieces of marble. Joe, I think these are yours too.
These should be Corbin.
Oh, Corbin, excuse me. Folks, meet Corbin Horn. Corbin is the head of Furniture and Decorative Arts department at Hindman in our Chicago office. And he's going to tell us about these marble busts.
Can you hear me, Wes?
I can.
Good, thank you. My connection had a hiccup, but we're back in order now. We are looking at two very handsome busts carved out of white Carrara marble. These busts are portrait busts of Frederick Vogel and Guido Pfister. Everyone in Milwaukee is familiar with those names, but we'll get more into that later. These busts are terrific. I'm a big fan of marble sculpture. We sell a lot of it in my department at Hindman, which is European Decorative Arts. Each of these busts is signed by the 19th century Italian sculptor Gaetano Trentanove. Trentanove was active in Florence, and in the mid to late 1800s, hundreds and hundreds of sculptors set up workshops in Florence and in the area around Florence. It became a mecca for artists working in a lot of different media, but especially marble, because of the abundance of Carrara marble in quarries around Florence and throughout Tuscany. Another reason that it was a favorable place for a sculptor to base his business is because of the abundance of workers in the area who were willing to labor in the workshops and help these artists produce sculptures, oftentimes in multiples. They would sometimes make the same sculpture 2 or 3 or 5 different times and sell it to wealthy tourists on their grand tour of Italy. I have, over the years, sold marble sculptures once, and then a few years later, seen the same sculpture again and said, wait, is that the same one I just sold? No, the artist made 2 of them. So that happened. And it's likely that when the artist was making these sculptures, he worked from the same form initially and then added the facial features and clothing to differentiate each bust from the one before it. In 1893, Gaetano Trentanove came to Chicago for the World's Columbian Exposition that we all know about and have read about so much in our careers. He had a really monumental marble sculpture that won him some acclaim at the World's Fair. And after the World's Fair ended, he hit the road to Milwaukee, where he took commissions from wealthy citizens who were looking to have a portrait made. These portraits are of Frederick Vogel and Guido Pfister, as I mentioned, who were the founders of the Pfister and Vogel tannery, which by about 1900 or 1910 was one of the largest tanneries in the world. I think I read that they had 3,500 employees at one time. It was in 1894 when Trentanove came to Milwaukee and began to make these busts. These were a gift from the family. By the way, let me come back to Pfister and Vogel. Vogel, of course, you know who he was, and Pfister is a name many will recognize because of its connection to the Pfister Hotel. The Pfister Hotel was conceived and built by the son of the man who's depicted here in this bust. For a while, the Historical Society displayed these busts at the Terrace Avenue Museum, which operated only for a few years in the 1960s. But I mention that just to tell you about the cachet that brings to their provenance. They have good exhibition history, which is something that a collector is interested in knowing when they're considering buying something. What are these busts worth? Well, when we're considering the market value of something to sell at auction, we look at comparables. It works just like real estate, as Wes mentioned. So I can tell you that over the last few years, I've sold a few busts almost exactly like this, and that gives me a good starting point for how to value them. The artist Gaetano Trentanove doesn't have a huge amount of collecting gravitas tied to his name. It's not like a painting by Spakusa. The name Trentanove itself doesn't add a huge amount of value to the sculpture, but someone who collects 19th century decorative arts and appreciates marble sculpture will be looking more at the quality of the carving and the realism of the subject when they're considering how much they would pay for this. I've sold two busts almost identical to these in the last year, both by Italian sculptors, neither by Trentanove, but similar artists who were active in Florence around the same time. One was of a bearded man, like we see here, and it sold for $2,250. The other was also a bearded man, different beard than we have here, but very similar subject, and that sold for $2,500. So in thinking about what these busts might sell for at auction, I would say that the sort of baseline starting value of a bust like this is something in the neighborhood of $3,000 to $5,000. Once you consider the historical value that is added by their having been owned by the Historical Society for so many years and by their connection to the names Vogel and Pfister, I could easily say that a bust like this is more likely to sell for $5,000 to $7,000 at auction. And I'm talking about for each bust. So an ordinary marble bust by a good 19th century Florentine sculptor, you can probably expect will bring $3,000 or $4,000. Once you factor in a big name with historical cachet like Pfister and Vogel and a good exhibition history, you could easily be looking at $5,000 or more. I wouldn't be surprised if each of these busts sold in the neighborhood of $5,000 to $10,000 at auction.
Corbin, a couple questions for you that others may be anticipating too. You mentioned these are made of Carrara marble. What is it about Carrara marble that has attracted sculptors really since, for literally hundreds and hundreds of years? What makes it so distinct?
Carrara marble is treasured and sought after because of its milky, glowing white color and because of its lack of inclusions. As you know, there are 1,000 or thousands of different varieties of marble, each of which has a different color and a different kind of veining in the stone. And sometimes that veining is desirable, but for portrait sculpture like this, you want as pure and clean a marble as possible so that the natural inclusions and colors don't distract you from the features of the sculpture. Carrara marble still exists and can still be found today, but it was really heavily used in the 19th century and earlier on sculptures like these. And much of it that existed around Florence was quarried, and there's not a whole lot of it left. It does exist in other places, but it's not as readily available now as it was in the 1800s. And I think that's part of the reason why it's so valued in sculpture today, because you just can't get it anymore. If you were an artist who wanted to work in marble, you would be hard pressed to find a big enough piece of Carrara marble available.
So it's basically the demand has outstripped the supply in this case.
For sure. And
the raw material.
And we tell people to be cautious when they're thinking about collecting sculpture, because there is a lot of marble which gets marketed as Carrara marble that is not Carrara marble. Just because a marble is white and a dealer says it's Carrara marble, you shouldn't assume that it really is.
It occurs to me looking at these two gentlemen, the gentleman on the left looks a little dingy, maybe discolored by maybe sitting next to a register that was heated by a house with coal, maybe. How do you clean something like that? Do you just take a bristle brush and get to work on it with soap and water? What's it take? Will you damage
You can damage the marble. Soap and water is safest. Marble is extremely porous, and anybody who has marble tile or marble countertops at home knows that you're not supposed to use anything on marble. Not only does it stain, it absorbs color and chemicals really easily. It is very easily corroded by abrasives and by chemical solvents. So cleaning with a dry cloth and soap and water is the safest way to clean marble like this. Although you wouldn't want to over clean a sculpture like this, because some of what lends it desirability is that dingy color. A marble sculpture like this that was made 20 years ago would be worth 1/4 to 1/10 of what these are worth. Nobody wants a newly carved marble sculpture. You want a marble sculpture that has had 100 years for its sharp edges to soften by being touched and weathered by the atmosphere. And you want 100 years of stains, but not extreme stains. You want it to have a faint appearance of patina, but not be heavily stained.
Yeah. So another lesson: leave well enough alone. Don't do anything unless you absolutely have to.
That's right. The best way to care for any antique is to leave it alone and don't touch it.
Great. And then finally, just out of curiosity, if these were to appear anywhere else but in the Milwaukee market, even recognizing how great a marketing machine Hindman is, what do you think they'd sell for, say, in Palm Beach?
That is a very good point. And we think about, because we have more sale rooms in the United States than any other auction firm, we think about this when we're selling an object that might have regional appeal. I would absolutely think that these busts would bring more money in Milwaukee than they would anywhere else in the US. I mentioned when I was comparing them to other busts that we sold, something in the neighborhood of $2,000 to $3,000. And I think that's a good guess as to what a mere decorative bust without any historical value added would sell for in another region. So if you took these out of Milwaukee, I think you'd probably be looking at a couple $1,000s or a few thousand instead of the $5,000 or more that I mentioned for these.
Terrific. Thanks, Corbin. Let's move along. And you've got what in the world is this? It looks like a bowl.
It looks like a bowl, but it is not. You are looking at an upside down Tiffany Studios lampshade. Everyone has heard of Tiffany lamps. And this lampshade is one that was given to the Historical Society in 1989 by Frederick Vogel III, actually. So the Vogel provenance is a good sign for me because it helps me to determine whether the shade might be authentic. I want to get one thing out of the way, and I apologize if it's elementary knowledge. Everyone who is listening probably knows this already, but I like to make sure, because in our field, we come across a lot of confusion about the work of Tiffany Studios versus the work of Tiffany and Company, the jewelry firm. Everyone thinks that when you hear the term Tiffany Lamp, it means a lamp that was made by Tiffany, the jeweler. They were two completely different firms, and you should not mix them up. Tiffany Studios, the leaded glass and decorating company, was founded by the son of the founder of Tiffany and Company, the jeweler. So although there is a family connection, they are two completely different firms that produced very different works of art. Interestingly, Louis Comfort Tiffany, who founded Tiffany Studios, did work at his father's firm, the jewelry company, at first. He was their original design director in the third quarter of the 19th century, but he had an interest in painting primarily and left the jewelry firm to become an artist. He worked for a number of years as a painter in both watercolor and on canvas. And although his paintings are sort of nothing like his fantastically Art Nouveau lamps and glasswork, his paintings are pretty cool and collectible on their own. He's a big enough name in painting that his works of art can bring a lot of money. The Detroit Institute of Arts has a few of them, and we've seen they're not extremely rare, but you don't see them at auction super frequently. So eventually he gave up painting and took an interest in glassworking. He worked at a number of glass workshops in Brooklyn and Manhattan, and finally in 1885 founded his own glassmaking studio, which by 1902 became Tiffany Studios. The firm changed names over the years several different times, but for most of its history, and it only operated for about 30 years, which is part of the reason why Tiffany lamps are so special. It changed names several times, but always some form of Tiffany Studios. So what are we looking at here? This is the shade from a lamp that would have been sold on a bronze base. The shade, many of the shades were made interchangeable, so that if you were going to Tiffany Studios to buy a lamp, you could pick the shade and then decide which base you wanted it to be on. I would guess that this shade was given to the Historical Society with a base, and maybe the base was misplaced over the years, or maybe the donor kept the base and only gave the shade. I'm not sure about that. But the good news for anyone who's trying to sell a shade like this is that even without the base, the lamp shade is worth a lot of money. Collectors might be trying to find a shade to match a base that they already have, or they might be trying to replace a shade that got broken. Tiffany lampshades came in hundreds and hundreds of different shapes and sizes and forms. Some of them, like this one, were more plain and geometric, and others were fantastical and over-the-top Art Nouveau scenes of animals and plant life and things like that. They're truly the best Art Nouveau work that was created in the United States. Collecting Tiffany glass is a whole collecting category on its own with a massive cult following, and his work, it can be and is usually worth a lot of money. All of the lampshades had different names. This is what we call a geometric lampshade. But what makes this one interesting is that it has a chainmail border along the bottom. If you visualize this shade turned upside down, it's a domed shade with a chainmail curtain sort of thing that hangs underneath it. So this is the geometric shade with a chainmail border. In order to authenticate a shade like this, and I don't have any question about the authenticity of this one, based on the photos it looks good, but you might be interested to know that a couple of ways experts authenticate these shades is to look at the condition of the individual panes of glass. They were all cut out by hand and soldered together with bronze. And over the years, the heat from incandescent light bulbs would cause the panes to shrink and expand, and some of them would crack. So one of the ways that you know you might have a fake on your hands is if the glass is too perfect. You should see some hairline cracks in the glass, and you should see some dirty grime and crust around the edges of the glass panes. Another really cool trick that experts use to evaluate these is something called the Tiffany rattle. When you hold the shade in your hands and you kind of shake it, or hold it with one hand and whack it with the other hand, you should hear a very faint rattling noise that is loose panes of glass shaking within their bronze soldering. If a shade was only made 30 years ago and is made to look old but isn't really old, it's less likely to have that rattle. So much as we talked about with the patina on the busts, you want the shade to be a little less than perfect. Those imperfections and slight damages are what make it authentic and what give it character and patina. Although, like with anything, there is a point past which there's too much character and too much patina, and we consider the thing ruined. So what is a shade like this worth? Well, in order to value it, I would need to know the size. Based on the picture, this looks like the 16 or 18 inch diameter. They made the small geometric shade in both 16 and 18 inches. The market value of a 16-inch shade, geometric like this one, is usually in the neighborhood of $6,000 to $8,000. That's the sort of base starting level value without any historical or special consideration for what is unique about the shade. Once you factor in the chainmail border on this shade, I would say we're more likely to be looking at $10,000 to $15,000. And if it had a good base, that can add double the value. They made both plain skinny bases, and they made very big, heavy sculptural bases that turn it into truly a work of art. So a shade like this by itself could sell for anywhere from 10 to 15,000. I wouldn't be at all surprised at auction if it brought 12 to 18,000, considering the condition and considering what kind of base might come with it.
You know, Corbin, that's great. Thanks for talking about this shade. I've never seen this particular example, but that doesn't mean a thing because, as you point out, Tiffany made a lot of different lamps, a lot of different shades. I don't know if you mentioned on the right hand, the slide on the right hand, I think that the interior rim of the lamp is stamped Tiffany Studios. Is that what I'm seeing there?
Yes. Shades like this were usually stamped on the inside lower border of the shade. So they weren't always stamped, but most of the time there should be a stamp. It will usually say Tiffany Studios, New York, and the stamp is one of the other ways that we authenticate a good Tiffany shade.
And of course, that stamp, because it's basically just a set of dies that you're punching into the relatively soft metal, that's one thing that forgers have discovered and have signed fakes. Isn't that correct?
Yes, and so you never rely on the stamp alone. We have a lot of people who bring us a fake Tiffany lamp thinking it's authentic. They see this, they point to the stamp and say it's stamped, it has to be real. The stamp is sort of the weakest indicator of whether a lamp is authentic. You want the stamp to be there, and yes, we look at the stamp and we have a good sense of whether the stamp looks right or wrong, but then you also have to rely on other factors such as the rattle, the condition of the glass, the patina. You want to look at the light switches. They used a very specific kind of early 1900s electrical socket that isn't always reliable because they changed the sockets over the years. Someone might have rewired the lamp and replaced the socket, but it's still a good factor in determining whether the lamp is real. So there are dozens of different considerations that all together, taken together, help you determine whether the lamp is a real one.
So we've got a lamp here without the base. We've got the shade that you think might be worth $6,000 to $8,000 at auction. If we added a nice bronze base, we might double that
easily.
So in the scheme of things, even if we doubled it, it's still sort of a modestly priced Tiffany lamp.
Yes.
What's the record for a Tiffany lamp?
So I'm glad you asked. An interesting story. The record was just set today. Tiffany made hundreds of different lamps, most of which we see in multiples, but occasionally a very extremely rare lamp will come to the market. And because it's so rare, it's hard to say what its value would be. Let me check my phone to refresh my memory about what this lamp sold for. I don't have a picture of it handy, but today at an auction in New Jersey, a lamp came up that has never been seen before. It's an extremely rare model for a Tiffany lamp. It has a big bronze base that is shaped like a dandelion, and then a spherical shade, which is iridescent glass, kind of like an oil lamp. That lamp was estimated at $50,000 to $70,000, and it sold for $3.7 million today in New Jersey. So,
wow,
$3.7 million is the current new record for a Tiffany lamp at auction.
Holy smokes! Well, again, everybody, jump up, go up into the attic, as they say on the Antiques Roadshow, and go and see what's hiding there that your Aunt Minnie gave you. 3.7 million. I can't even imagine. Wow. Well, great. Thanks very much, Corbin. Let's move along to Katie Guilbalt.
Hello, Wes. Thank you so much. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you just fine. Katie
Excellent.
is a jewelry specialist. for Hindman, who lives in San Diego, California. So we're broadcasting truly nationally tonight. Katie, what do we have here?
We have we have an interesting example. When I was going through the images that were sent over, you know, there's lots of different ways we could go, different things that we could pick, and I decided to go for what in the jewelry world is a little bit of a controversial topic, and this is hair jewelry. Obviously, when you glance at this, you're going to see really quickly that there's a lovely locket that's here, but on the chain itself, that's actually, if you look closely, that is very, very finely braided hair on the locket. So this particular piece, and just to tell you a little bit of background on hair jewelry in general. So hair jewelry is something that, and actually we call it hair work because it comes in lots of different formats. I'm sure Corbin and Wes could comment on some of the hair work pieces that they have seen in decorative arts over the years. But the Victorians were epic mourners. They were so good at it. You have Queen Victoria, who mourned the death of Prince Albert for, I think, about 40 years. And she really set the gold standard for mourning and for wanting to make sure that people made mourning something that was very expressive and something that they could do in public consistently for a while. So what the Victorians came up with was this really interesting concept of using human hair from someone who had passed away and actually weaving it into art, and in this case, into pieces of wearable jewelry. And it's very, very finely woven. Women did this as a craft that was, you know, similar to, think of people sitting around quilting or needlework or things like that. And this craft of weaving hair became something that women did to create these pieces of very, very sentimental jewelry. So this is something that is likely, you know, it's going to be the late 19th century. I'll talk about this piece in a little bit more detail, but the concept of this hair art is going to be, in hair jewelry, is going to be the late 19th century. So the great thing is this piece here, excuse me real quick. So this piece here, as I said, so the Victorians,
Looks like we've lost Katie. When she comes back up, you know, it will be, we'll get her right back on. You know, hair jewelry. Oh, there's Katie.
Sorry about that, Wes. I'm back. I had a connection issue. Okay, so hair jewelry in general, we're talking about late 19th century, and the women were making these pieces, and it was made out of human hair. In another concept and another version of this would actually be that young girls, you know, I think back to when I was younger, I used to steal my mother's really nice thread that she would use to needlepoint, and I would make friendship bracelets for my friends, very elaborate friendship bracelets sometimes. And there was also a way that women and young girls were using hair kind of more in sentimental reasons for friendship. And they would kind of trade hair with each other and things like that. This particular piece, I think, was more of a mourning sentimental piece. And the clues for that would be that there's a locket attached to it. This locket doesn't appear to have a glazed compartment on it right now, but it likely at one point did have a glazed compartment where you could put an image in there. So it would be something like a photograph. And there were other pieces of mourning jewelry where you would have it woven, but then you would also have a glazed compartment where you could have pieces of hair behind it. So that was another way that people would kind of display hair of a loved one who had passed away. And I've also heard, I don't know if Wes has a comment on this, but I heard that at times if you did see hair jewelry or a piece of hair art that had very, very light hair, it was often something that was from a child, simply because as we age, our hair gets darker. So I had always heard that if you saw pieces that had very light hair, it was likely from a younger child. But this particular piece, it probably had a glazed compartment at one point. You'd put a picture behind it. So that really is, those are the clues that lead me to believe that this is something that had a very sentimental kind of mourning aspect to it. The other great thing about this piece is, and you'll see in the center there, it's a little bit more of a detailed image. That's actually, and then if you look at the locket on the right there, you'll see the outline of that triangle Perfect. So this particular piece actually has a mark on it, which is really exciting, and it's great. So that mark, you see, it has a C, a Q, and an R in a triangle. And the great thing about jewelry is we have all these registered trademarks and hallmarks, and we can go and look them up and see who made this particular locket. And this particular piece was made by a company called Carter, Cornstrom, and Remington. They were very prolific with making lockets, and they were basically out of Massachusetts, Altaboro, Massachusetts. And not a company that I had really known about before seeing this piece, but that's not unusual. That's the great thing. We can look up in our databases and see what some of these marks are. So it was a new mark for me, but a really nice thing to see. This particular company was founded. The other great thing is you can look up patents too. So I can look up when the company was founded, but I can also look up that they had some really interesting patents for some innovative kinds of watch fobs and watch chains that they were doing. So they were doing their work probably like early 19th century. So I think it was something that was founded late 19th century. And then this particular piece of the locket itself is probably something that's from early 20th century, maybe, just turn of the century. There is a possibility perhaps that the hair chain was married to the locket at some point, because the hair chain and the hair jewelry is probably something that was a little bit more popular, in more like in the mid to late 19th century. So there's a possibility that someone acquired the locket early 20th century and mated the two. And the effect is really beautiful, and it has some really beautiful engraving to it. And it has a really lovely pearl kind of set in the center of it. So I'm not positive, without being able to examine it in person, I'm not positive if the findings and if the locket itself are solid gold, which would mean like 14 karat gold or 18. There's a possibility that it's a particular metal called rolled gold, which was popular then, which would have been kind of a combination, an alloy that was a combination of some base metals and some gold to achieve a gold color, but make it a little bit more accessible as far as the price point went. So I'm just not positive about that without examining the piece in person. We'll talk about the next piece. So if we could advance the slide, because I want to talk about all of these guys in totality before discussing value. So this particular piece, these are a pair of earrings. And this is also very, very finely woven hair, if you can believe it. The great thing about these earrings is, and the reason why I picked them, is the silhouette on them is actually very modern. It looks like something that I might see if I went into Bergdorf's in New York and found a great pair of earrings. I actually decided to wear this evening. It might be a little hard for you guys all to see, but a pair of earrings that I have that are a similar silhouette, and they're in, you can see they're in rose gold with faceted smoky quartz. So it's a little bit of a similar silhouette. I'm not in mourning. I'm just wearing them because I think they're fun and pretty. But this is a pair of earrings where if you just kind of squint your eyes and glance at them, you might think that this is something that was made today. As I said, that is very finely woven hair with what might be gold or a different kind of gold alloy, little end caps, and then the findings on it. But I just like these earrings because I feel like they're something that would be great to wear now, or great to have worn back then. Again, these were probably worn in memoriam of somebody, and it was a way that people could take a piece of their loved one that had gone on. And this is a time where the average life expectancy was much, much lower than it is today. So people were around death a lot more, I think, than they are nowadays. And it was just something that was part of everyday life. So you could actually take this piece of a person, do this devotion to them by creating this craft and making it into an actual piece of jewelry that you could wear on you and have this tangible way that you could remember the person. The craft itself, have never actually created a hair work or anything like that myself, but you might, when you touch it, it might feel a little stiff. There was a different type of kind of glue, or sometimes a homemade solution that they could add to it to kind of add form and stiffness to it. But it is amazing, I think, that these things have survived over the years, and that this particular pair of earrings has survived for us to be looking at it today. Because it's still a pretty fragile piece of our history. Now, I'd like to say that I chose these pieces because there is extraordinary demand on the market now for hair jewelry, and they're going to be selling for tens of thousands of dollars. But I picked them just because I think they're fascinating, and they're an interesting part of our history. And sometimes people have them in their families, and they might look at this and go, "What is this material?" It's human hair. That's what it is. So for this, and as I said, it's controversial just because when I think of this, for me personally, I'm fine with when I see the jewelry and it's behind kind of if it's a piece of hair behind a glazed compartment or something like that. The fact this is actually something that's kind of touching you and it's someone else's human hair, that's what kind of rubs people the wrong way. No pun intended, but it's still a really cool, fascinating part. And if you go back to the locket that we were looking at before, thank you. On this particular piece, lockets are still something, it's a silhouette that's still very, very popular today. Women are still collecting lockets and they're putting pictures of loved ones in them, not necessarily in a memorial way. Maybe it's something where people are putting pictures of their children in there or grandchildren, things like that. So the actual silhouette of the locket is still tremendously popular today. If this piece were in gold, as we said, if we were combining these and kind of doing them as a group, I would say that it's still something that, as I said, if this is gold at auction, it's still probably something that's more like in the upper couple of hundreds of dollars. So maybe like $600 to $800, something like that, if this were in solid gold. And again, if it were something that were more of a base metal or in rolled gold or something like that, you're looking at a couple $100s for the group. But it's something that's a little bit controversial with people who either think it's really cool or people who say, no, thank you. So I don't know where I stand. I think I'm somewhere in the middle. I can appreciate the craft and appreciate the art form. And I think that a lot of families have something like this in their history. So and there's different types of mourning jewelry actually that are very, very valuable on the market nowadays and do command a big price. And one of them is Georgian. So it's going to be a little bit later, a little bit older than Victorian, but Georgian lover's eye jewelry and lover's eye pendants and rings and things like that. And we've sold some of those for, $5,000, $6,000, $7,000, $10,000. And it's smaller, sometimes with gold, sometimes with gemstones, but it's a particular kind of mourning or devotional jewelry that actually is very popular on the market nowadays. But I like these pieces a lot. And I like that you guys have them in your collection there in Milwaukee. And I'm sure other people have them in their collection as well.
Katie, I can't let this pass without asking you, have you known any buyers to wear hair jewelry today?
I don't think so, Wes. I think that if people are buying it, it's something that they're collecting and they're collecting from a certain time period. And they're maybe displaying it. There's some great ways that people are displaying jewelry nowadays where they don't have to wear it. If someone was purchasing this particular locket with the woven hair chain at auction, they actually might end up divorcing the two and actually wearing the locket on a chain. It's a little bit more durable as well than wearing the actual hair jewelry. So it's a little bit of both, but I think more people would be buying something like that and actually displaying it.
And in my experience, I wouldn't want everyone to think that just hair jewelry was made for women, because hair jewelry was also turned into jewelry like watch chains.
And the Milwaukee Historical Society actually has a great collection of watch chains as well. So I'm glad you mentioned that. I think the craft itself is something that was more made by women, but you're right, the people who were wearing it, there were a lot of watch fobs and watch chains that were made for men.
If our viewers ever have an opportunity to look at one of these pieces up close, I can guarantee your mind will be blown to think how in the world these were woven so finely. You can get a sense of that when you're looking at the chain on the locket, but the earrings are really
and the earrings keeping their shape too. If you ever get to actually handle them and touch them, it is something where it's incredible that they've kept their shape over time. And as I said, they've survived this many years. They haven't been crushed. They haven't disintegrated or things like that. So you have to really respect and admire the fact that those pieces have survived as long as they have, given the material. But the intricacies in the weaving are really incredible.
Yeah. And one more thing that I think that bears mentioning, and some of our viewers may have seen these or may even have them as family heirlooms, are wreaths made out of human hair that are framed in deep shadow box frames. And often the really elaborate ones, and by wreath I mean just a sort of a circular design of hair or a geometric design of three-dimensional hair that might
And
include
different family members
flowers
here
and
too. It
leaves.
wasn't just one family member. It was kind of
Yeah,
like, let's
and
weave
that's
the
right.
different family members together.
That's right. And they often use the hair of a multi-generational family members.
Mhm.
Well, that's great. Hair today, gone tomorrow.
You were
I had to
waiting to
say
say
that.
that, weren't you?
I had to say that.
You've had that prepared for the last hour.
Well, thank you very much. I
Mhm.
think that concludes our presentation. We're happy, I'm sure, to entertain any questions that you have for any of us. Fire away, John.
Yeah. So first off, I don't know if I spelled this out beforehand, but we're not selling any of these things tonight. So that's important to note. That the Milwaukee County Historical Society has a very fine process for what they call deaccessioning things. That might not be pertinent to our mission, but the things that we have tonight, it was really interesting to find out some more information and to see it kind of through a different perspective than just a museum exhibit. We did get a comment from Robin actually during the last one with Katie about having an old family ring with woven hair inside the band and a small plate on top with the initials. So people are already like thinking like, oh, I might have some of these types of things. A few questions I thought of while you all were going through this presentation is, what is priceless? Like, is there anything that you're like that is, I mean, like you can think of, okay, the Star Spangled Banner at the National Museum of American History. Well, that is priceless, right? But like, have you ever encountered anything where you're like this is priceless? Do you define that?
Well, I'm sure my colleagues will have different opinions, but as an auctioneer, I would say everything has a price. We don't know. We may not know what it will ultimately sell for, but the great example today is the lamp, the Tiffany lamp that Corbin spoke about.
Exactly.
Here was a lamp that was offered with a pre-sale or a pre-auction estimate of $50,000 to $75,000, and it sold for $3.7 million. So. There's an old saying among auction house employees: we may not know what it is, but we know what a good thing is.
All right, that I guess is an answer I guess I would have expected for people that work in for an auction company.
But listen, John, I'll just, and I'm sure. And I think Corbin actually touched on this, and maybe Joe did. Sometimes something is so rare that it's so unique that we really don't have an idea of what it is worth, because
there's nothing to compare it to.
We that's right. We base a lot of our pre-auction estimates or evaluations on the history of similar things that have sold at auction. So one could look up Tiffany lamps, and we could see lots of different Tiffany lamps and get a real sense of what they sell for. And in this case, I'm sure that the auctioneer said, well, let's be conservative. It's a rare lamp. Let's say it's worth $50,000 to $75,000 based upon other sort of similar Tiffany lamps.
Makes sense. It's interesting to think about how you all do your work as experts and specialists and historians in a different sense than maybe what we practice at the Historical Society. Have there ever been auction items that you say, oh boy, I hope I can get that? Is that allowed even? Is that like a thing?
I mean, every single auction, there are things that I think, wow, I'd love to have that. And we are allowed to bid, sure. This hasn't been the best time to bid. I've actually bid on a number of things this year without any success. I've tried to bid on rugs and some furniture and some paintings and haven't gone home with anything. But we're around amazing material all day long, and it is definitely something we talk about. If I could have anything in the sale, wouldn't it be great to have this? But A lot of the times, the material that we get really excited about goes a little beyond our means, which is fine. That's why we're selling it in the first place, is to hopefully make some money off of it. But yeah, we're just surrounded by amazing things all the time.
Yeah, I think it's important to point out that our job as auctioneers, our number one job as auctioneers, is to make the most money that we can for our clients. We may want something, but that's not our job. Our job is to market the property that is consigned to us, take a little bit of the final bid price, and return most of that money to the client who has entrusted their property with us to sell. So I agree with Joe. Man, there's just every auction I see something that I'd say, boy, I would like to have that, but most of the time I don't even put in a bid, because I know that some collector with deeper pockets is going to get it. And one other thing I think that bears mentioning, when we bid in our auctions, we basically submit a bid prior to the auction. So we say we want this Tiffany lamp. We'll bid $10,000. Once the bidding starts in the sales room, or once the auction goes live, we are not allowed to bid live.
That removes the conflict of interest from
Right.
the situation.
You can't drive the price up. Right.
Right.
Corbin, I bid on 15 things in your last dining at home sale, and I got none of them.
So Joe mentioned that briefly.
Pain.
The auction market has been so robust and so strong that you can't win anything. Things are going for so much more money than expected right now. It's hard to bid on and buy anything.
Which of course is counterintuitive, but really since April for sure of 2020, people have been were stuck at home. They were sitting in front of a computer screen all day long, looking for something to do, and many, I can guarantee you that many thousands of people discovered auctions, and every auction house in the country, by and large, experienced more than robust sales. I think we had the second best year in the company history last year in the height of a pandemic, largely because people are stuck at home, or at least that's what we think.
My wife just did sourdough, so that's a different kind of hobby than auctioning. All right, well, I guess one thing to kind of wrap up, so because I see some comments coming in that are very specific or maybe just more of a comment on things that they might have. So let's say somebody finds something and maybe they come to the I will say maybe they come to the Milwaukee County Historical Society first and say, is this pertinent to your mission as historical preservation of local history? And we say no. Like, how would they get a hold of you all to take a look at that? At something?
Well, lucky for all you Milwaukee residents, we have a Milwaukee office. And if you look in the if you simply Google Hindman Auctions Milwaukee, you'll see a telephone number, and you can dial in that number or email our local rep, Sarah Malloy, and she'll hook you right up. She'll come over and take a look. If there's something that she thinks that one of our specialists needs to look at, she'll send a picture and get back to you, and we're happy to accept important property from the Milwaukee area. And there are a lot of great collections in Milwaukee and a lot of great collectors there.
Absolutely. Well, cool. Well, Katie, Corbin, and Joe, and Wes, thank you so much for your time and your expertise tonight. And hopefully we can do this all in person at some point, and that would be a lot of fun.
Terrific. Thanks for the invitation. I know we all enjoyed it.
All right.
Thank you so much.
No problem. The experts from Hindman Auctions, and thank you all for tuning in. And like I said, we'll be announcing some more information on some of our bike and kayak tours soon. So stay tuned for that. Otherwise, stay safe, and we'll see you again soon.
Bye, everybody.